Hello, everyone. Great to have you back for another episode of Palestine This Week with me, Nassim Ahmed. Usually it's Maureen Rabbani, but I am equally happy and pleased to have with me this week Muhammad Shehada. Muhammad, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to be back.
Yeah, so Maureen, as I mentioned last week, he is traveling, and Muhammad has been with us before on Palestine This Week, and I'm really pleased to host him again. Is really insightful when it comes to the situation in Palestine and in Gaza in particular. Over the past 2 years, I would say he's been one of the main source of information and analysis on Gaza. As a profession, Muhammad is a visiting fellow with the European Council on Foreign Relations, Middle East and North Africa program. And as many of you will know, he is a Gazan researcher, writer, and human rights advocate. So, Muhammad, there's a lot to get through, and I've not really had a chance to get your thoughts um, on Gaza, on Israel's long-term goal and plan for Gaza. You wrote a number of pieces, especially on Twitter, long threads on Twitter, explaining what Israel's long-term strategy is in Gaza. So we will get to that. But I want to begin, if I can, with the big story from this week, which is the UN Security Council resolution endorsing Trump's, can say, so-called peace plan. Last week, we spoke about a number of international law experts who said that, who concluded that Trump's peace plan breaches international law because it really it does not reinforce previous human rights previous UN resolutions, and violates a number of international laws. So when you saw the resolution being passed, just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What is the main concern you have with the Security Council resolution that has voted to endorse Trump's peace plan?
Well, with the Security Council resolution, as soon as it came up, it was basically a nightmare materializing. It had all the loopholes that Netanyahu was desperate to include in order to maintain the genocide, either in an attritional form by keeping Gaza under engineered circumstances and conditions that are calculated to bring about the collapse of life there, or by allowing him to resume the genocide back to full force the way it was before this so-called peace plan ceasefire. If you look at the resolution's contents, it has two main elements. Number one, an international force that was supposed to be there to protect Palestinians and monitor the ceasefire, enforce it, train the Palestinian police, etc., but is now going to be a subcontractor of Israel's occupation. It is tasked now with going after Hamas and other militants, doing disarmament by any means necessary, including force, and doing Israel's bidding. The IDF failed at crushing, destroying Hamas over 2 years of genocide, unprecedented warfare that is way more aggressive than any war that comes to mind in the modern era. So why would ISF succeed with this? But they are still tasked with this mission, and it's not by hope that they would succeed at it. It is by design that they would fail at it, to give Israel an excuse to go back to genocide if Netanyahu decides to, if it's politically convenient for him. Israel has already been telling what is called the CMCC, the center that Trump created in Israel, in Kiryat Gat. It's populated by about 200 American military personnel and some European advisors. And Israel has been telling them that neither the ISF nor the IDF can disarm Hamas. And the ISF cannot be a match to Hamas. And the IDF needs to stay in Gaza for the medium term, which means forever. So with that resolution, you see the ISF given a very broad, elusive mandate that is untenable, unimplementable, on purpose, so that they would be used by Israel as an excuse of saying, we're just assisting them, or the ISF is not doing enough work, we're not going to withdraw. The mandate that is given to them, they're not living up to the responsibility of counterinsurgency, detaining, torturing Palestinians, capturing weapons, destroying tunnels, destroying homes. So we're just going to do it ourselves. And the other thing, that other trick in here, is that the mandate there is going to prevent any country from actually sending troops on the ground, which is the Israeli hope. When Turkey, as soon as the ceasefire was announced, you had Turkey, Qatar, Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and Pakistan offering to send troops to monitor the ceasefire and protect Palestinians. Netanyahu was not happy. He was extremely disappointed. So he wanted to put every loophole, every roadblock in place that would deter any of those countries from sending any troops. So now with this mandate, a very sort of counterinsurgency, espionage, subcontracting of the occupation mandate, no country would want to do that kind of dirty work on the ground, which is Netanyahu's way of ensuring the ISF does not materialize, or that if they materialize, they would be paralyzed because those governments would be afraid about their own public's reactions to being seen on video, beating up, killing, torturing Palestinians. The other element in the Security Council resolution is the Trump Board of Peace with a broad mandate, usually undefined on purpose. And in practice, it's very aligned with what is called the Tony Blair Plan for Gaza, which creates this same board with judicial powers, legal powers, land distribution powers, the power over natural resources, economic powers, the power to hire and fire civil servants, fire the leaders of the government, the power to decide what happens to Gaza's marine field, to Gaza's natural resources, the power to dictate the economy. Even the diplomatic representation is given to that Blair Board of Peace, which is now Trump's. So you see this unaccountable, untransparent entity that would run Gaza from A to Z with an administrative committee that is only tasked with service provision. And Gaza is merely the testing ground. If it works there, it will be replicated in the West Bank. If it works in Gaza, it will also be replicated in other countries. Take a look at Yemen, other countries where the US would have a vital interest, Venezuela, countries where you would deliberately need to have no sovereignty, no government, no institutions. You would just need an American lordship over the place to exploit, to extract, to take advantage, and that's it. There was even an article in Israel's Channel 12, I was surprised to see it, that described that Kushner wanted to turn Gaza into a tax-free haven for billionaires, and that Larry Ellison and Peter Thiel would be interested to even spend hundreds of millions of dollars into what is called tax-free startups with very cheap labor, so turning the caged population there into indentured servants. And that is basically everything that is on offer with this UN Security Council resolution, with the members of the council that supported or voted for it, or the ones that abstained. Every single one of them behind the scenes has been extremely critical of the wording of that resolution. They tried everything possible to change it because it is Netanyahu's wording. It's not even Trump's. Trump doesn't have an eye for detail. You saw it with his ceasefire proposal. There was an early version of it that Netanyahu changed significantly when he sat down with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff for 6 hours to add enough loopholes for him to not commit by any clause in the ceasefire, not to commit to withdrawal, to opening the Rafah border crossing, to getting aid in the amount that is agreed upon. And he did the same thing with this Security Council resolution. So all of those countries behind the scenes have been raising alarms, voicing concern. And then when the moment of truth came, all of them folded. It is yet to be seen what they got in return. I don't think the US forced them into it. If you look at countries like Russia.
Yeah, are you talking about Russia? So Russia and China, for example. Russia did issue an alternative statement, which I think was ignored. And that's another question. Why did Russia and China abstain from the vote? Why did so many Muslim countries endorse it, given that when the countries were voting at the same time, more or less, simultaneously, Netanyahu issued a statement declaring his opposition to a Palestinian statehood. So Israel is quite explicit that there will never be a Palestinian state, and they have reiterated that over and over again. And discussions about that, as you know, because you follow Israeli media quite closely, that they're very open about this, that there will never be a Palestinian state. But this illusion of a Palestinian state is still hanging in front of all these Arab countries and all the other countries that are endorsing and voted for this. So it's quite a bizarre situation. And we know that in the end, only the parts of the resolution which supports or Israel favors will be the ones that will be implemented. Anything that is against Israel's favor it will be completely rejected and opposed. We've seen that in the Gaza ceasefire agreement, Israel has been bombing Gaza for the past, since the ceasefire agreement, is still bombing Lebanon as well. Just yesterday, there was a massive assault bombing of a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, killing 13 Palestinians. So there's a lot there. So why do you think China and Russia abstained, and what faith do they really have, given that Israel openly rejects any idea of a Palestinian state?
Well, basically, with China and Russia, I don't think the US forced them into it. They probably have bigger fish to fry, and they most likely got something in return. It is yet to be seen what it is. But I don't think the US had any leverage against, sort of punitive leverage against Russia or China. Russia is already buried under sanctions and is still surviving. Trump just folded in this soya beans war with China that hurt American farmers significantly. And he folded with the negotiations and tariffs, economic terms, etc. So they could have easily vetoed it. There is the talk that both of those countries might have abstained and not vetoed because they saw that all the other 13 members accepted. But since when was this the norm? Like, I don't think that Russia would care about vetoing this and getting the blame for no progress on the ground. Like, they could have easily said our vision is the one that is more consistent with the mandate of the UN, more consistent with the international community, with international law, with those basic principles of the rule-based international order. And that's the ironic thing, is that the rational proposal is coming from Russia. The colonial proposal is coming from the liberal world, from what is called the civilized world. With other countries on the council, Sierra Leone, Muslim countries, etc., I think they just got the marching orders. Each single one of those countries either wants something from Trump or they are afraid of Trump. So as soon as they get a call from the White House saying you have to vote for this or else, they would show up and vote for it. You saw it also with the statement that was issued by those different countries, Arab Muslim countries, endorsing and supporting the UN resolution before it passed in the Security Council. They were forced to do this as well. Biden used to do the same thing. When the ceasefire was at a stalemate in August 2024, Biden simply forced Qatar and Egypt to issue a statement to say there is significant progress, there is a breakthrough, the ceasefire is around the corner. And the whole reason for this was for Kamala Harris's DNC to pass without interruption so that she can go on stage and say there is a ceasefire around the corner in Gaza, and to tie the hands of Iran and Hezbollah from retaliating against Israel when it killed Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah top militant leader in Lebanon. So it's the same kind of dynamic. Like back then I was in Doha and they were saying explicitly to me, Qatari officials, Arab mediators, in Egypt, I was there as well in that exact month. And they were explicitly saying that there's no progress. There's no talks in the first place. The two parties didn't show up to the negotiating table. Biden wanted to start the deal from scratch. But the Americans told us if we issue a positive statement, it might create pressure on Netanyahu domestically to compromise more. There was no pressure at all, none. And it's the same dynamic here.
Yeah. There is a lot of talk about a new permanent status quo in the Gaza Strip, where Gaza will be split into two. Israel, of course, controls 50%, and the remaining 50% is in the control of Hamas. And as we know, in the Middle East, there was a phrase that was being coined recently. It's quite, I think it's very revealing and very true. The temporary has a way of becoming permanent in the Middle East. We can look at, for example, the refugees, the expulsion of Palestinians in 1948. That was supposed to be a temporary scenario where Palestinians would be permitted to return back to their homes. There were a number of UN resolutions, most famously Resolution 194. That was meant to be a temporary. The displacement was meant to be temporary. So was the occupation. The occupation was meant to be temporary, but it became a permanent reality, as is the case with the Palestinian Authority and the Oslo Accords. So there is a long history where these temporary situations become permanent and lock Palestinians into even deeper oppression, even deeper subjugation. So do you see now Gaza facing the same prospect of this division of Gaza in the same way Gaza was separated from the West Bank, and West Bank and Gaza was separated from historic Palestine? Now Gaza will be separated from itself sections of Gaza from the sections of Gaza which is controlled by Hamas. Is that the reality that we are facing now? Another temporary situation which will become a permanent reality?
Yes, absolutely. The temporary becoming permanent is a global phenomenon, not just in the Middle East. So if you look at Myanmar, for example, about 1 million Rohingyas were kicked into Bangladesh, never allowed back, except for a few hundreds. Myanmar built this, what they call a model village that can fit about 300 people. In it, there's no homes. There's what is called dwellings. Each dwelling does not have a bathroom, does not have a kitchen. There's no communal kitchen. There's not a single kitchen in the whole village. And each home is incredibly tiny, excruciatingly tiny on purpose. And they moved in about 500 Rohingyas in those 2 model villages to claim, look, the genocide is over. There's no more genocide. We're allowing people back. Israel is doing the exact same thing now. They divided Gaza in 2 pieces with an invisible line called the Yellow Line. It's deadlier than the Berlin Wall. On the Berlin Wall era, if you cross from East Germany into West Germany, you would make it alive. You would cross to the other side alive. In Gaza, if you just think about coming close, in close proximity to that line, you're shot dead immediately. And the line is sporadically marked with concrete blocks, but most of it is just invisible and elastic. Israel keeps expanding it into what is called West Gaza. East Gaza is where the IDF is stationed. It's about 58 to 60% of Gaza's area. Nobody is allowed to be there except for 4 criminal gangs that are cultivated by the IDF as proxies, as front groups. So you have one gang that Abu Shabab, led by a drug dealer, convicted drug trafficker, with 2 deputies that are confirmed ISIS commanders. You have another gang that is in Khan Yunis, Hussam al-Astal, that is led by reportedly a murderer, a convicted murderer, and a collaborator, and another gang in East Gaza City led by a collaborator, and the 4th gang led but reportedly by a drug dealer in the very north of Gaza. Those are the only people allowed there. Each of them is about between 100 and 300 militants and their families. So it's barely a couple of thousand in those areas. In West Gaza, where the entire population is located, and squeezed, caged, bombed, starved, virtually Israel is still not allowing enough tents in. They're not allowing a single equipment of reconstruction into West Gaza. They're not allowing any concrete or any reconstruction material there. And in East Gaza, they're saying, we're going to do reconstruction only in East Gaza. We're going to create what is called the new Rafah. It rhymes with Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale's New Bethlehem facade. Again, like Myanmar, Potemkin village, a facade that is there to pretend that the genocide is over, that Israel is giving a chance to a couple hundred criminals, gang members, and their families, while keeping the entire population under calculated conditions that are there to bring about the collapse of people there or to drive them out of Gaza. Israel is using this East Gaza, West Gaza division to point the finger at East Gaza and say, look, we're not preventing reconstruction there. It's the Hamas-free area. We're not preventing progress there. So the bombing of West Gaza is because of Hamas's fault, the encroachment on West Gaza. So Israel will use this East-West division to justify resuming the genocide in the West by land, by air, by sea, as well as the starvation and the lack of shelter. I talked to a source at CMCC, the center set up by Trump in Israel to implement his ceasefire, and he said West Gaza is going to be a permanent refugee camp in ruins forever. The same thinking was in Syria with the Trump administration in the first term. They had what was called West Syria, East Syria, divided by the river, the Euphrates River. And the Trump administration was saying everything to the east will become like Dubai. It will become prosperous. We will do reconstruction, support, aid, money flow, etc. West Syria would be left cut off from the umbilical cord to wither and die and collapse. People will beg us to allow them into East Syria. The thing there, the spoiler alert, is that East Syria never became a Dubai. It was a Potemkin village. And it's the same with New Rafah. I talked to CMCC and they said, there's not going to be any real buildings there. It's going to be containers, prefabricated homes, tents. And it will be run by this Abu Shabab gang, as what is the Americans are calling them local contractors. And get this, the Americans are saying, we will hire local contractors with contextual sensitivity to the religious culture. Those are ISIS members. They're calling them sensitive to the religious culture. So basically, they would have them run that place. And it's a win-win for Israel. If people don't move in because nobody wants to move into an area run by gangs and controlled by the IDF, then Israel would blame Gazans in West Gaza for their own demise, starvation, and suffering. If people move in, then they are moving on the Egyptian borders. So it doesn't take much for Israel to manufacture a pretext and kick them all out.
Yeah, I mean, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians are still in Western Gaza, controlled by Hamas, and there's a few families, as you said, who are in the Israeli-held territory. So given that's the new status quo, did you see any prospect of Arab countries contributing in any way financially for the redevelopment of Gaza? Because they have their condition. The condition is that there has to be a pathway to a Palestinian state. I don't see how, I mean, with all the talks that are coming out, even from yesterday when Mohammed bin Salman visited the White House, they tried to get him to commit to normalization, but he conditioned that on pathway to Palestinian statehood. Whatever we may say, Saudi still seems to be insistent on, that there has to be an end goal here, an end game where we see Palestinian state. So given that's the scenario, given that Trump is also heavily reliant on Arab money, Gulf money to redevelop the Gaza Strip, do you see any prospect of these countries putting money into this project?
There's multiple things to unfold here. Number one is that all of those countries have explicitly told the Israelis they will not spend a single dime on New Rafah or East Gaza superficial reconstruction. They know that it's a scam. Not a single country agreed to fund this. UN agencies, every single one of them refused to operate there. International organizations as well. So now it's the Americans that have allocated funding, put aside a budget for New Rafah, and they are still looking for a country to foot the bill for what is called the operational logistical expenditure. So to run the place, to pay the salaries to the criminals, the gangs, etc. So that's with East Gaza. The other thing is that with those countries, the Arab countries that have mediated the ceasefire, they have been explicit behind closed doors that Trump's plan is neither a peace plan, nor a framework, nor a pathway. They called it a performance. It was a performance designed to get Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. It didn't. Back then, Kushner and Witkoff were panicking. They kept telling Arab mediators, get us a deal before Thursday. The prize is coming out on Friday. That was their main concern. But it gave Trump the second best thing. It gave him unanimous positive media coverage from the left, right, and center in the American mainstream media. And he's keen on maintaining this because it's one of the rare occasions where he gets credit from everyone. And no one is saying that this is a failure. And the reason why the ceasefire is holding until now is because Trump doesn't like the prospect of failure after his casinos went bankrupt and everything that is attached to his name went bankrupt. He doesn't like the prospect of failure. He doesn't like the prospect of being seen as someone that is being played for a sucker or a fool by Netanyahu. So that's why it remains, but it gives Israel a free hand to do a lot, to bomb Gaza, starve it, prevent shelter. And Arab governments, they understood this. They said this ceasefire is a situation of no peace, no war, and it's mainly about getting more food in, getting as much shelter as possible, and suspending, not stopping, but suspending the bombing or reducing its intensity, that in the case the genocide is resumed, Israel would not be able to resume it to the same level of barbarity without significant backlash, because now the Israeli captives have been released. So they lost one of the two main significant talking points, the other one being the destruction of Hamas, which Israel itself admits is untenable behind closed doors. There's the third element where Arab countries have a clear roadmap, Muslim countries as well, and Europeans. They have a clear roadmap. They are willing to reconstruct Gaza under two conditions. As you said, pathway to Palestinian statehood, which can mean a lot of things. It doesn't have to be even a genuine one. It can be a performative one. And the second one is Israel committing that it will not destroy what has been rebuilt before multiple times. I've lost count of how many times reconstruction processes were started in Gaza, never finished before Israel started destroying everything that was rebuilt. I personally lived through 3 Israeli wars, 10 military operations, which are high-tech killing sprees, and 2 ground invasions. The major reconstruction was after 2014. By 2023, it was about 80% finished. Israel was preventing the reconstruction with every bureaucratic, technical trick they could come up with. So Arab countries are asking for the same guarantees. and that if you destroy something, Israel would be the one responsible for rebuilding it. It's not going to be like Legos where you build homes in Gaza, it falls down, you put it up and put the pieces together again. There is a clear roadmap to get this done. All it takes is allowing Hamas to step down from government. They agreed to step down in December 2023 and to hand over the government to the Palestinian Authority or to a technocratic government, allowing the Palestinian police that has been trained in Jordan and Egypt to go into Gaza and take over from Hamas. And Israel has been vetoing both. Until now, they're not allowing the administrative committee in, and they explicitly vetoed the 5,500 Palestinian policemen. Netanyahu wants Hamas to stay in power in West Gaza, allowing the ISF in. Until now, Netanyahu is not allowing them in. Until now, he's creating conditions that are deterring countries from pledging any troops to the ISF. So it's just a trick. There's the other thing with
so just to interrupt there, I think even before 7th of October, it served Netanyahu's interest to keep Gaza, Hamas in power. Even after 2 years of genocide, it's still serving Netanyahu's interest to keep Hamas in power. It's just a bizarre logic Israel finds itself in, that for Israel, Hamas being in power still serves its interest. And I think the end goal seems to be some kind of ethnic cleansing. There is still fear if Netanyahu manages to, or Israel manages to keep Western Gaza unlivable. There is, as I said, these permanent scenarios lead to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. That's still is an aim, and we see that being carried out in other ways, or you can say, back channel ethnic cleansing, and that's. Last week there was a flight from Israel of Palestinians into South Africa, and there's this shadowy Israeli organization who is behind taking hundreds of Palestinians into South Africa and other countries. So there seems to be an effort, clandestine way of encouraging or enticing Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip, because ultimately the end goal is ethnic cleansing. So I interrupted you. You can follow, so you can continue, and also just address the fact that who is this shadowy organization, Israeli-Estonian organization that is behind hundreds of Palestinians being taken to South Africa.
Yes, absolutely. There's lots to unpack here. The first one is Israel, as you said, has not given up on the ethnic cleansing dream. They also have not given up on the resettlement in Gaza dream. The reason why it's called East Rafah and not or New Rafah, not New Jabalia or New Beit Lahia, is that Rafah is on the Egyptian borders, Jabalia is on Israel's borders. So when I asked CMCC, like, why not just start it in the very north instead of the Egyptian borders, then people are more likely to go there. The answer was because Israel wants to keep their area cleared as a buffer zone. The implicit answer is Israel imminently wants to move settlers into that area slowly once they manage to freeze the withdrawal lines. Once that yellow line becomes permanent, you can easily, under the radar, allow a few hundred settlers in, and that becomes the nucleus that births settlers, exactly like the West Bank. All it takes is a couple of settlers with a tent. Those two become 10, the 10 become 100, then it becomes an official settlement. With the ethnic cleansing, there's two paths that Israel is advancing. Number one is what is called voluntary migration, which is you have a choice between starving to death, getting bombed to death, living in a permanent state of non-life, or leaving. There's nothing voluntary about it. And Israel, in that regard, has been in touch with every country that you can think of to take Palestinians in. Nobody accepted to be a party to ethnic cleansing and genocide. So they resorted to that alternative of just scamming Palestinians through front companies, forcing them, shoving them onto charter flights, and then sending them off unannounced to different countries around the world to embarrass those countries into taking them in, South Africa, Indonesia, Malaysia. But that number is very insignificant. It's about 300 people, so it's not working fast enough. But it is there to be an assurance sign to Netanyahu's base, which is the very far right in Israel, to Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and the constituency, that, look, I'm doing something about it. There's the other thing. They've been doing this under the radar throughout the genocide. Israel has been operating this airport called Ramon, through which that flight left to South Africa, I think to Kenya first and then South Africa. And Ramon is an abandoned airport that Israel built, poured a lot of resources in, and then it didn't get much traction. It was about to go bankrupt. So now they're making money out of Palestinians. Each person that applied to fly to South Africa was charged something between $2,000 and $2,700 per person. It is an astronomical ticket price. So they've been using it throughout the genocide under the radar. Like I am aware of an Israeli organization that in August this year led about 108 Palestinian students on a charter flight from Ramon to Bangladesh with a transit in an Arab country. They've been doing it to other countries as well in cases where people have visas or permissions to enter the country, but it was moving excruciatingly slow. There's even a Jewish businessman from Boston that was offering his charter plane for free to shuttle Palestinians out of Gaza around the world. And the claim is that he's doing it out of humane motivations, that he doesn't want them to suffer. Israel is playing with it no matter what his motivation is, because they want the ethnic cleansing. But that process is painfully slow, which is why Israel pivoted to the second path, and that is to concentrate the population on the Egyptian borders and then manufacture a pretext, a massacre, mass killing that would force people to flee in the only direction that they would be allowed to, which is Egypt, Sinai. Israel has been trying to do this for over a year, even more since 2024. You had Yoav Gallant having the idea of what he called the gated communities or the security bubbles. Then you had Israeli businessmen pitching that idea on PowerPoint slides to the Biden administration, the gated communities with biometric data. Then you had Israel Katz in July this year saying we will concentrate the entire Palestinian population in a camp on the Egyptian borders, which means a concentration camp. He was very open about it. He called it a humanitarian area, a sterile zone. And that idea is still pretty much alive with this new Rafah. So either people move there with significant magnitude and amount that Israel can then kick them out, or nobody moves in there and they remain stuck in West Gaza until it dies out, until it collapses on its own.
Yeah, I mean, the scenario creates, sparks some of the darkest human motives, let's just say. I mean, even if the plan motivation isn't ethnic cleansing, because chartered flights, how many Palestinians would agree to leave the Gaza Strip? There is other motivation, which is front organizations, shadowy organizations who want to capitalize on human suffering and charge Palestinians $2,000-$3,000 to leave an unlivable strip of land, the Gaza Strip. So there is this other capitalist motivation which we are seeing. So the South African statement kind of captures all that, and I want to read that out. And they said, an unregistered and misleading organization that exploited the tragic humanitarian condition of our people in Gaza, deceived families, collected money from them, and facilitated their travel in an irregular and irresponsible manner. This entity later attempted to disown any responsibility once complications arose. So, it's worth bearing in mind that the Palestinians who went to this, flown to South Africa, they were stranded. They were there for something like 14, 16 hours in the plane until their issue was resolved. So, and they were just abandoned. But I'm sure someone somewhere, this Israeli organization, made thousands of pounds. So the motivations may be not just ethnic cleansing, but also capitalism, just greed, sheer greed, trying to exploit the suffering of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Back channel form of ethnic cleansing, you can add to that as well. If you wanted to add anything to that, if not, we'll move to my next topic, which I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Yeah, absolutely. The occupation, apartheid, has been a ginormous money-making machine for Israel. If you look, for example, at the Gazan economy, trade within Gaza or in the West Bank, about a third of the Palestinian GDP is spent on Israeli goods. In Gaza, most of the trade was with Israel because Israel doesn't give you any other choice. There were Palestinian efforts to make our economy more independent. One attempt was, I think, under the Muhammad Shehada government, to import about 400 kettles from Iraq and Jordan, so to be less dependent on Israeli cattle, cows, sheep, etc. And then Israel started to punish the Palestinian Authority, impose sanctions on them. They even arrested those kettles And they said, under the pretext that they have not had verifiable documents of vaccination, they tried all sorts of tricks to get the Palestinian Authority to back down from this, because Israeli cattle farmers started to have a panic and a meltdown, and they started protesting publicly. It's a huge money-making machine. There's the other element. Israel always brags about allowing Palestinians, before October 7th, allowing Palestinians from Gaza to get medical treatment in Israeli hospitals. And that was like a resource of ginormous wealth to the Israelis. It was pouring down on Israeli hospitals about $100 million per year, because it was paid for by the Palestinian Authority. It was a significant chunk of the Palestinian Authority's budget. At some point in the first Trump administration, the Palestinian Authority decided to cut this paradigm so that Palestinians would be only treated in Palestinian hospitals and not in the Israeli ones. And then you had the directors of Israeli hospitals coming out and begging publicly and saying, leave politics out of this, we're about to go bankrupt. It's a huge money-making machine. You're seeing it now with another kind of individuals taking advantage, companies, startups, either to test their products in the Palestinian territory or to make money out of the genocide. GHF is the prime example. They were claiming that they would give meals to Gazans. One meal would be something, if my memory is correct, something about $1 for one meal, which is supposed to cover logistics, armed personnel, contractors, the rental, the stuff, the fencing, the food, all of it. It was a scam. They would just come up with random numbers saying, today we gave 100 billion Brazilian meals. Who's going to be there to check? And they made a fortune out of it. And you're seeing this with this company as well. There's always this entrepreneurs of misery and profiteers of it. But in Gaza, you see it in the ugliest form possible. For example, Israel has had some problems with farmers throughout the genocide, Israeli farmers. They were not, I think at some point, they were not selling enough potatoes. So they started dumping it on Gaza. So they were starving Gaza, but then exceptionally, they started to allow potatoes because they wanted their farmers to make some money. And they were sending it there for astronomical prices. So in Israeli media, there were protests from the Israeli residents of the Gaza envelope, the kibbutzim around Gaza, that were saying, we are seeing trucks with Israeli Hebrew labeling on it, full of vegetables going into Gaza. Why is that? But it was because a kilo of potatoes in Israel was being sold for, let's say, $1, $2. In Gaza, it was sold for $50, $100. It was a huge moneymaker.
Yeah, I think the motive beneath all that, the thing that's behind this level of dehumanization of Palestinians is the fact that, Palestinians are not seen as equal, and and that's behind many of the policies and many of the things we'll be discussing now as well. Last week, there was a report by Physician for Human Rights. And in that report, they found that 98 Palestinians died in Israeli custody. Again, as a result of torture, complete dehumanization of Palestinians. And it concluded that the killing of Palestinians in Israeli prison is normalized. It's not something that's an exception. It's become normalized. And that's partly because, as I said, I think the current underneath everything we're discussing is the fact that Palestinians are completely dehumanized in Israeli society, which allows them to be raped and dehumanized in this way, killed in Israeli detention centers. So I have a question about rape later on, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on the report by the Physician for Human Rights in Israel, and then new report which concluded that at least, this is a bare minimum, they said, at least 98 Palestinians were killed in Israeli prisons since October 7th.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you have in those torture camps is that every single person that is captured, kidnapped, and taken to them is tortured daily, nonstop, until they are sort of conditioned, until they become institutionalized to do two things. One is sit all day, handcuffed, blindfolded, chained around the legs as well, immobilized, and sit still, do nothing. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to mutter. You just sit still. And the soldiers are there taking their turns to just beat up people, humiliate them, curse them, make them do all sorts of tricks, like basically domesticating animals almost. It's a very grim, aggressive metaphor. But you have soldiers, for example, forcing detainees to curse the prophet, to curse God, to renounce their religion, to call their own mothers whores, to bark like dogs, to imitate animals, to walk on all fours, All of it is coming out in the UN Human Rights Council's independent commission reports and in other reports by Israeli organizations, etc. So they want to domesticate them in that regard. You see basically on video every time an Israeli journalist is allowed to film one of those torture camps, as soon as the soldiers approach a cell, everyone in that cell needs to bow down in a position of bowing down to a god immediately, head down, bowing down completely. If you lift your head, you're going to be tortured. One Palestinian detainee, he begged his lawyer not to come to see him because he said, every time you come here, they beat me to a pulp. They rape me. They take turns to rape me every time you show up. So there is this element of domestication, breaking the will. And in that process, people could die under torture, under starvation. Every single Palestinian that walked into those torture camps lost many dozens of kilos when they came out. They came out unrecognizable. There's the other element of outright murder. It's not death by torture, but it is killing. There was one example that came out in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper that is considered a left wing. The report was about a Palestinian being interrogated at the Shin Bet building, and that Palestinian was handcuffed, chained, blindfolded, etc. And then the headline was, he jumped out of a window. He plunged to his death out of a window. How can a chained, blindfolded, handcuffed Palestinian escape the most secure Israeli security agency and jump out of a window? They just threw him off. Yeah. You have it also with Adnan al-Burj, the Palestinian respected doctor that was raped to death. They dropped him in the courtyard of the prison without his pants on, bleeding, bruised everywhere. And then he succumbed to his fate. So you have those two elements, outright murder and killing as a result of continuous torture. And they take pleasure in it. If you read the record, Israeli soldiers there, they say, we didn't take part in the war in Gaza. They didn't take part in the genocide with their own hands. So they felt that it's doing part of their duty by torturing Palestinians in the prisons nonstop, including the doctors. So there was one soldier that said the doctors would take pleasure in torturing wounded Palestinians. There was one Palestinian that said, every time I told the doctor he was operating on me without anesthesia while I'm awake, every time I said it hurts, he hurt me even more. He said, it should hurt. You should hurt. Even with the incident of rape.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned they take pleasure in. I mean, we saw this really bizarre situation in Israel, where the Israeli soldiers who tortured and raped Palestinians detainees in Sde Teiman detention center. They entered the Supreme Court, and the entire audience stood up and cheered out of respect. It's such a bizarre, sick situation in any other instance, but in this case, in Israel, somehow these soldiers who are accused of raping Palestinians, they get a standing ovation. There was a podcast I watched this week where an Israeli lawyer by the name of Ben Marmarelli, he was interviewed, and he spoke about how Sde Teiman, the rape cases, is really a tip of the iceberg, and it's being used as a scapegoat. And rape is actually common in every Israeli prison. And I mean, it got me thinking about, say, Abu Ghraib in 2004. And at that time, I remember there was a lot of talk about American soldiers having racist stereotypes about Arab culture and Arab society, and that being the root of why they use torture and rape against Arabs in Abu Ghraib, for example. So there's a really well-known book called The Arab Mind by Raphael Patai, a Jewish author. So he made the conclusion that Arab prisoners respond strongly to shame, humiliation because of the structure of Arab society. It's a very racist outlook on life, on society. And that book was taken up by Washington and US military intelligence as providing the framework, the psychological model of how to interrogate Arab soldiers in Iraq, Arab fighters in Iraq, for example. And that's the model they've deployed in many other instances, because in their mind, Arabs respond to humiliation and this kind of sexual perversion. And I think, so we saw that in the context of Abu Ghraib, and I think that same scenario is being played out in Israeli prisons as well. Israelis have this racist mindset because their references books like, as I said, the Al-Majd, and they're using rape and torture in this industrialized way because they have really racist assumptions about Palestinians and Arab populations.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's three things to unpack here. Number one is Israel has been, as you said, using this stereotype that torture on its own, imprisonment on its own, is not enough to break the will of Palestinians. If they imprison a Palestinian, 1 million Palestinians have been kidnapped, detained arbitrarily by Israel since 1967. The released Palestinian detainees usually wear it as a mark of pride that they sacrificed something for the cause. They enjoy this popular support because everyone understands you sacrificed your life, your golden years for the Palestinian liberation struggle. So they pivoted to rape, and they started raping Palestinians systematically, repeatedly, as a matter of procedure. So basically, since the first Intifada, even before, it became almost a matter of policy, an implicit, unannounced policy, but is used, known to everyone, used by everyone. So you see them, if you read before October 7th, just Google Palestinian raped Israel, you will see an infinite amount of headlines in the West Bank in particular. And it's very rare for Palestinians to speak up about the rape because they are always threatened explicitly. If you talk, we're going to kill you. We're going to find your family. We're going to kill your family. We're going to take you again. There was one woman, I think, that went to complain about rape at an Israeli police station. I remember the report was from a few years ago. And if my memory is correct, they were laughing at her and they arrested her for coming to complain that she was raped at that police station by a police officer. There was a woman that I worked on her case documenting her murder. Israeli soldiers killed her. I think she was called Huda Hashlamon around 2015. Israeli soldiers, after they murdered her, they took the body in the armored vehicle and they stripped her down and they took pictures of her legs and then they shared it on WhatsApp and said, look, she had hair on her legs. She never heard of shavers. And they were making fun of it. With Gaza, it exploded because mainly Israeli soldiers were documenting itself and bragging about it. They saw it as taking part in the struggle, taking part in the genocide by raping, torturing Palestinians. Human rights reports from the UN documented a pattern that they concluded it was a matter of policy and procedure. It was so systematic, so widespread, that the only conclusion is that it was, as according to the UN, it was instructed from the top civilian and military echelons down to the soldiers. You see cases where a female officer would ask two soldiers to bring a Palestinian doctor or a nurse before her eyes and rape him in front of her eyes. Other cases where an Israeli female soldier asked two children in Jabalia to strip down completely, I think down to their underwear or fully naked, and dance while she filmed them for a TikTok video, and she was laughing hysterically. He forced them to dance for her entertainment at gunpoint. And then you see the rape of certain Palestinian prominent individuals like Adnan al-Bursh, doctors, journalists in particular, to make an example out of them for the others in prison. You see reports about Israel using dogs, training dogs to rape Palestinians. It's so sick, so sadistic, so pervasive. There's the other element is that I've been reading Israeli newspapers every single day since the genocide started. 16 newspapers, 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the evening. It hits me that every single day I read another report, a new report about rape in Israeli society. It's so rife, it's so widespread. This morning, there was a report in Haaretz, right before I jumped on this call with you. The report was about 45% increase in sexual harassment and abuse in schools against children in Israel. It's so insane, so bizarre. And you saw it playing with the atrocity propaganda after October 7th, when Israel was trying to throw everything to see what sticks and what gets the most polling data. One Israeli story that came out was by Ilan Levy, Netanyahu spokesperson at the time. He filmed a friend of him. I think he was called Shakha, which in Arabic does not have a very pleasant connotation. But he basically filmed his friend Shakha, and he said, tell them what happened. And I think it's still on his Twitter until now. He's saying, oh, so the Hamas terrorists, they came in, they cut off that guy's penis, they forced it into his mouth, they raped him with his own whatever. And he keeps going with this vivid, sadistic imagination. Yeah. And it's so insane that it's so widespread. With this incident of rape that we know about, and that's the third point, the only reason we know about it is by complete mistake and coincidence. That Palestinian prisoner was raped so violently. They took turns to insert different objects in his rectum, a broomstick, a fire extinguisher, a phone. They took turns, they took pleasure in it, they took part, every single one of them. It was, I think, about 12 soldiers or 10 soldiers, and then the circle was narrowed down to 5 that actually took part in it, and the others were shielding them from the camera. And that caused massive internal bleeding. His rectum was ruptured. His intestines were having a massive bleeding internally. So he was hospitalized, and the doctor at the hospital, he thought that that Palestinian hostage was raped by fellow Palestinian hostages. It did not occur to him that he was blindfolded, handcuffed the entire time. In the video that was leaked, you see them lying down on the floor flat on their stomachs when the Israeli soldiers that just picks one person at random and take him for rape. And the rest of the Palestinian hostages there are hearing the screams resonate in their ears as a way of terrorizing them. So the doctor reported it because he thought it's another Palestinian prisoner that did it. And as soon as the report came on record, it's on paper, it's in the hospital official records, and the doctor spoke up. He said, I had a Palestinian prisoner that had 1, 2, 3, 4. So it became in the public domain. As soon as that happened, the Israelis quickly discovered, no, it's one of ours. It's impossible for Palestinians to do this one to one another while handcuffed, leg cuffed, blindfolded. So when that happened, you had the entire Israeli medical institutions coming out in panic to deny that this ever happened. They came up with 2 narratives, or 3. Number 1 is that it was not the soldiers, it was other Palestinians. Number 2, they even said they had the audacity to say that he raped himself. He took turns to rape himself until his intestines exploded. Number 3, they said he attacked the guards, and when they were tackling him down, that caused the internal bleeding. They tried everything. There was even a petition by Israeli doctors to try to absolve the rapist from this. So it became a national scandal because it broke out in the news. And then you had the Israeli military attorney general panicking that this is going to attract the eyes of the International Criminal Court and the international community. So how do we bury it? It's by singling out those 5 people and putting them on a sham trial to prevent the ICC from intervening or prevent any attention to the matter. But she didn't anticipate that you would have Israeli ministers, members of parliament, rabbis, religious leaders, pop artists, public figures running to the detention facility, storming it, rioting there to demand the right to rape Palestinians and to break those soldiers free. And she didn't anticipate that she herself would be investigated, imprisoned, detained, fired, etc., for daring to do any of this. So it backfired big time.
Yes, I mean, again, as I said, it's decades of impunity, decades of dehumanizing Palestinians, a whole generations after generations looking at Palestinians as though they are subhuman. It has real consequences. So rape is one example, the torture and abuse and killing of Palestinians, detention. And also what we're seeing in the West Bank, where they're just settlers are completely just out of control. They feel they can do whatever they want. We saw this video recently last week, really horrific video of a group of settlers bludgeoning sheep to death. And it was just really, really horrific. And a lot of liberal Zionists in the West said this is an exception. You know, these are like rotten apples. They don't represent Israel, and the Israeli government should do something about it. Forgetting the fact that, you know, the government provides cover for these settlers to rampage and carry out war crimes and terrorize Palestinians in the West Bank. So let's turn to the West Bank and just get your thoughts on that, because as I said before, you follow Israeli media closely. What is their response when they see this level of, I would say, pogroms? Every week in Palestine, the West Bank, we see, what is it, a Kristallnacht, you know, in an effort to pogrom Palestinians, carry out pogroms against Palestinians. I'm of the view that, you know, I'm persuaded by Ilan Pape, who has a, I think, really good explanation for why there has been such a rise in settler violence since October 7. He's always had he's been talking about this idea that in Israel there's a kind of civil war that's taking place between the state of Judea, there's the crazy settlers in the West Bank, and the state of Israel. There's a civil war between those two. Throughout history, since the creation of Israel, the state of Israel wished to carry out ethnic cleansing in an incremental manner, slowly. But now the state of Judea, who settlers who are now really in control, who are in the driving seat, they don't want to wait anymore. They've seen an opportunity and they want to expel Palestinians as quickly as they can. So there's this tension taking place about the timing. There are those who want to expel Palestinians now, and the state of Israel who took a long-term approach, which is to incrementally see Palestinians being expelled. As I said at the beginning of this episode, that the temporary becomes a permanent reality. Palestinians were ethnically cleansed in 1948. They were supposed to return. They were blocked from returning. Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. That was supposed to be temporary, but the occupation has become a permanent reality. That has been the state approach, but settlers have a different attitude. They want to do it openly because they know at the end of the day, no one's going to stand in their way. The state would support them, and also the US will support them because of many different reasons. So just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's two things here. Number one is that there's no distinction whatsoever by now between the settlers, the Israeli government, and the IDF. They're one and the same. If you look at the IDF, for example, the commander of the West Bank, Avi Bluth, is an extremist settler who lives in an illegal settlement in the West Bank. If you look at Gaza, one of the chief perpetrators of genocide was an Israeli general called, the name slips my mind now, but it'll come in a second. And Yehuda Vak. Yehuda Vak was one of the ugliest Israeli generals in Gaza. He's an extremist settler himself from Kiryat Arba. He's the one responsible for the Netzarim corridor that became what is called an extermination zone that took over an area that is about 20% or over of Gaza. Every home there was demolished completely. In Jabalia, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, he was leading the campaign there, and he told his soldiers, destroy every home so the Arabs would learn when they come back and they find nothing. He's the one that has been openly telling his soldiers to block food from coming in, harass international convoys trying to bring food in, aid trucks, etc., to make it impossible in every way. He was even the Israeli colonel or general at the GHF that was responsible for killing about over 2,000 Palestinians, GHF and Israeli soldiers together. So that guy is a settler from Kiryat Arba. He even studied at an Israeli religious organization where one rabbi there used to teach that Hitler's only fault is that he killed the Jews, not the Muslims, not the Arabs. So that's the mentality. They took over completely. Every time you see an Israeli soldier killed in Gaza, most of the time, the chances are you will track it down. It's a settler. That's why they're destroying it with such passion. Right now, you have most of the destruction being inflicted in East Gaza is by Israeli settlers with bulldozers. There are three main contracting companies. There is other less significant ones, but it's all populated by settlers, especially the Hilltop youth. With the government as well, this morning, I was reading in Yeda'ot Ahranot, the Israeli newspaper, the headline was, the Israeli Hilltop youth are now taking over the Likud party. They're running in the Likud primaries. If you look at the deputy speaker of the Israeli parliament, Nassim Vitouri, he just said a couple of days ago that, what's his name, the Kach, the Israeli far-right rabbi that was so extreme of a settler, so extreme of a terrorist, that the US blacklisted him as a terrorist, and Israel itself blacklisted him as a terrorist. He was so openly racist. And then you have the second most powerful leader in the Likud, the deputy speaker of the parliament, saying that Kach is justified and Kahanist, Meir Kahana, and Kach is justified. And then you have Israelis in the government, in the even in the opposition, that have become completely Kahanist, completely part of this now dissolved movement, Kach, that Ben Gvir was part of. The Israeli ambassador to the US, I believe he is a settler, but he was also part of this Kahanist move. And Haaretz, they ran a headline recently saying that Kach is now, Kahanism is now the mainstream in Israel. It's no longer the fringe. All of us are Kahanists now. Like Kahana's ideas, that's the other point, as you mentioned, there's the Israeli division between people who want ethnic cleansing to be attritional versus people who want it immediate. And Kahana would be the latter point. And now you have it as the mainstream idea in Israel. We have 50% of the
Sorry to
Israelis.
interrupt, Muhammad. I don't think we got here. I don't think we got to this scenario by accident. I think that there has been a long effort by the settlers and extreme right in Israel to basically capture the vehicle of government. And we see people like Smotrich, Ben Gvir, in every key position in Israel, they have someone who is a settler in the West Bank. So these radicals, I'm sure they took a long-term strategy, because right at the beginning of the creation of Israel, there was this tension between those who looked at the state as being some kind of um, uh, a pariah. The state, if it doesn't serve the goal of occupying the biblical Holy Land, Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is more holy in the eyes of the settlers than Tel Aviv. I think they don't really care about Tel Aviv. They care more about Jerusalem. And in their eyes, if the state failed to, cement sovereignty, extend sovereignty in Jerusalem and all the other parts of the West Bank, which they deem to be holy, then they can ignore the state. So that tension has always played out between those who see Jerusalem as the capital and Tel Aviv are the more secular ones. And I think over a course of many decades, the settlers have strategically positioned themselves in key positions in government, where now this kind of entryism, you can say, if you want to use that word, they've now taken over the state of Israel. And I think that there is no reversing that trend anymore. If Israel was a settler colonial state from the beginning, it's more so now than ever before in steroids. This is quite clear to see, and which is why we're seeing the level of violence and the ethnic cleansing we're seeing in the West Bank as well. We'll end on that. So I'll just get your thoughts on that, and we'll end on that.
Now we can also discuss the other issue on Saudi Arabia if you'd like. But with that one,
Carry on, sorry.
Let's see how it goes. You can cut that part out. But so with the Israeli settlers, what you have there is after 1948, the Israeli founding fathers like David Ben-Gurion, they wanted to cleanse the Israeli-controlled area completely and expand them as much as possible. The ethnic cleansing continued for many years after Israel was created. So, for example, my own grandfather's village, it was depopulated a year after Israel's so-called independence. There's another village next to it. It was called Majdal, and Majdal was depopulated, I think, around 1950 or 1951. Back then, the Israeli Labor Union chairperson, he begged Ben-Gurion to allow people to stay there, to be a model of coexistence. Ben-Gurion, he forced them on trucks at gunpoint and sent them to Gaza. There was another village called Houj, and Houj was a village whose Mukhtar, the chief clan of that village, he sheltered in Jewish refugees from the British mandate, from British soldiers. They rewarded him by going in many months after the Nakba, destroying everything, leveling it to the ground, looting whatever is valuable is there, and putting them on trucks and sending them to Gaza. So they were no different from the Israeli settlers today. They were very left-wing. Those were the left-wingers in Israel. You had David Ben-Gurion saying the only function left to the Arabs now is to run. And at some point, he's advocating openly for the necessity of killing women and children to cause terror. After this, you had Israel trying to replicate the Nakba, but failing. So the Israeli mainstream did not sort of embrace the attritional ethnic cleansing by morality or virtue. It was because they understood the alternative is undoable. So they tried 2 years after the Nakba, 1951, they started a unit called 101 that was headed by Ariel Sharon. And it launched what was called the reprisal attacks in Gaza. They would go into refugee camps, launch terror attacks, kill 30 people, 50 people overnight, leave in the hope that this would terrorize people into fleeing into Egypt, because Gaza was under Egypt's control back then. They continued to do this year after year. They tried to convince Egypt to take 12,000 Palestinians into Sinai, Palestinian refugees from Gaza, and the US offered the equivalent of today's currency, about $350 million for 12,000 people. That project collapsed. They continued with the reprisal attacks. 1967 happens. They try to do another Nakba. A significant amount of the population in Gaza is expelled at gunpoint, including my own family, my grandfather. I think in the immediate aftermath of 1967, in the same year, Israel expelled about 50,000 people from Gaza, between 38 and 50,000, and they continued. The population in Gaza, if you look at the population graph, it was going downwards. It was in the negative because a significant amount of people were kicked out, but not the entire population. So they managed to kick out, let's say, a quarter of Gaza's population, and it stopped there. So that's when they understood. That's when you had Moshe Dayan, the defense minister, left wing as well, labor, saying publicly, we will tell Palestinians we have no solution. Whoever wants to live here shall live like dogs, otherwise they should leave, and we will see where this process would lead us. Maybe 250,000 people would leave in the next 5 years. That was all the way in 1967. So they embrace this attritional form of ethnic cleansing. With the settlers, they are too impatient. They want to see it immediately. So they want to finish, like Gaza is just the laboratory, the starting point, the pilot project. They want to finish off the Palestinian question as fast as possible. And if they get their way there, the West Bank is, of course, next, but they're not even waiting there. They're already doing it in the West Bank, as you said, with daily pogroms. The difference in Israel is that you have what is called the enlightened Israelis, the secular liberal kind, and then the pro-Netanyahu part. And it's about half-half, virtually speaking, approximately. And you have the enlightened kind whose reaction before October 7th, when they saw pogroms, is to mildly criticize it. So you had the old guard. There was a commander of the West Bank back then, Yehuda Fox, who would criticize these things and call it a pogrom. And it's the same dynamic with Kristallnacht. When Kristallnacht unfolded before the Second World War, you had some Germans expressing embarrassment in it because it countered the image of the superior, the Übermenschen German, the civilized, superior, overachieving German. But then as soon as the fog of war was there, Germans felt no moral urgency to put on a mask. And they just unanimously supported what was happening there. You have the same thing now in Israel. After October 7th, they felt, okay, we can have a victim narrative that is solid. We will throw all the atrocity propaganda you can think of, and we will use this to lose the need for the moral cover. So I saw it like I knew an Israeli left-winger who speaks Arabic fluently. She was a member of the Labour Party for much of her life. She was a member of Knesset. And then October 7th happens. She starts denying atrocities in Gaza. She denies the death count. She calls for the invasion of the Shifa hospital. She goes on completely Kahanist. And it's because, and I tried to reason with her because I knew that individual. There was nothing to reason with because they felt that now there's no need for a moral cover. They can just show the ugliness, that the veneer was removed. All the ugliness lurking in the background can now unfold and be unleashed without consequences, and they feel entitled to it. So
Yeah,
now, even now.
Yeah, so one of the key, I've always said that. I mean, if you're an Israeli settler and you saw destruction in the Gaza Strip and really there's no one to rein the Israelis in, and despite them committing genocide, you look at it and say, okay, we can do whatever we want. There is you know, this impunity which they've had for the past 2 years. That is also one of the motivating factors, and also some of the other points you mentioned. But let's end, I guess, I mean, normally what we do is we end with another international story, and the big international story is Mohammed bin Salman visiting Saudi Arabia. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And also, there's the Israelis are seeking to renew the Defense Pact 20-year security agreement with the US. The current one runs out in 2028, in 2 years' time. So every 10 years, they have to renew their pact and agree to the billions they will receive from the US. At the last one offered Israel something like 38 billion. So we don't know what the next one will be. But there is a lot of talk within the MAGA movement about this defense pact. And I think Netanyahu himself is recognizing there's been a massive shift in the US. Support for Israel has plummeted. And Americans don't want to be handing out money. So Israelis themselves are thinking, okay, is there a different way we can reframe this defense pact to one where we are leading on research with Americans and Israelis together, rather than simply being an aid to the Israelis? They're thinking of how to sell the story to the Americans in a different way, rather than simply being a defense pact. So you can comment on that, and also Saudi Arabia, and one of the key deals that was struck between Trump and Mohammed bin Salman is the purchase of F-35 jets. So again, those F-35 jets were only going to be sold on the condition that Israel gave a green light to the sale of F-35s. And if you're in America and you're looking at that and they're saying, you know, why does Israel get to veto a transaction between America and Saudi Arabia? If the sale of F-35 benefits the US, helps US economy, why do we need authorization from Benjamin Netanyahu? So those two things, you can look at it from other ways if you want, but for me, it was interesting how those two stories, again, sparked an ongoing row within MEGA about Israel's sway and Israel's influence in American politics.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing with the Israelis having a veto power in US politics, it's nothing new. I believe it was in Obama's memoirs where he says something, he admits that he understood he wouldn't be able to pass Obamacare without without folding on Israel's demand and giving them support. So who on earth are the Israelis, a small country out far away from the US, to determine whether or not American citizens would have health care? That was basically Obama admitting it. There's the other thing with the Saudi deal. So today in the Israeli media, they feel humiliated because they feel MBS bypassed normalization, got what he wanted without having to concede or compromise anything to the Israelis. On the F-35 part, it is a deja vu because you saw the same promise being made to the Emirates when they normalized with Israel. So they did everything that Israel wanted, and they never got the F-35s because even though the Emirates were trying so much to be supportive of this coexistence, this Abraham Accords, this paradigm of peace, whatever you want to call it.
They jumped through every hoop they jumped through.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah.
Exactly. They sent even citizens, and I was told it's not Emirati citizens; it's just naturalized citizens from Ahwaz, from Bedouins, etc. That they sent them to Israel to perform these love festivities where you saw two women wearing pajamas and holding an Emirati and an Israeli flag, two Emirati Israeli people eating ice cream from the same cone. And they tried everything. They didn't get the F-35. They were bogged down in so much bureaucratic work, so much documents, paperwork, that they just gave up and decided to buy Rafale fighter jets from France instead. And it wouldn't be very different here with Israel today. They were saying explicitly, even if the US sells those fighter jets to Israel, we have the same as them, F-35s in Israel. Ours should be more advanced. Ours should have a competitive technological edge over Saudi Arabia. It is because of two reasons. Number one is Israel is always, and the US looks at Israel as the hegemon in the region, as sort of the extension of the empire, the cups and the beat, as Nixon called them, the country that is there to guarantee that everyone falls in order, falls in line, and implement this sort of dominance. There's the other reason where Israel doesn't trust anyone in the Arab world, no matter how hard they try to suck up to it. Like even on a Palestinian level, there was a Palestinian man from Hebron who was called David ibn Abraham. He had a Jewish name because he converted. His grandfather saved the lives of many Jews in Mandate Palestine, so he had this credence. He converted to Judaism, studied the Torah by heart, befriended far-right rabbis. Israel kept rejecting his application for being recognized as a Jew out of hand automatically every time he applied, even with rabbis trying to help him. Not a chance. And at the end, he was once trying to cross a checkpoint, I think between Hebron, inside Hebron or outside of it. And then the Israeli soldier calls on him to drop his bag and raise his arms in the air. And he says, "Ani David ibn Abraham, I'm a Jew." He spoke to him in perfect, fluent Hebrew. And the soldier gets so angry. "How dare you call yourself a Jew?" He shoots him dead. It's like the Israeli saying a dead Arab is the only good Arab is pretty much literal there, that they don't trust the Emiratis, no matter what happens, to have a comparative advantage. It's because Israel's vision to the region is that they should be the hegemon. Everyone should need them. Everyone should be dependent on them for spyware, for intelligence, for military might, for protection, etc. Because that's how you create this alliance against Iran, by portraying Iran as the other hegemon that wants to take over. So come under our umbrella and we will protect you. So if the Emirates gets the same kind of fighter jets, there's no need for Israel. So they were panicking about this. But then the other Israeli vision for the region is that each country in the region should be either a failed state or a vassal state. There should not be real countries. There should not be real governments. There should not be representative governments, because they know the Arab public would not get along with what Israel stands for and with the status quo. So it needs to be either a failed state or a vassal state. You see that in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran. They want the airspace of every single one of those countries to be completely open so they can bomb it at will whenever they want. The other element on the Israel's deteriorating image in the US, after the genocide for 2 years, Americans, especially on the right, they are struggling to articulate one coherent sentence of why do we need Israel? What does Israel give us? You have all those American lawmakers constantly saying, yeah, the alliance between us and Israel is ironclad. And when we give Israel the 3.8 billion a year, 20 billions in sales, whatever, then we get a lot in return. And then people are asking them, name one thing that we get in return. The only two things that they name every time is cherry tomatoes and chips on your computer and phone. But then you had the chief of the Mossad, the former chief of the Mossad, Yossi Cohen, coming out and saying publicly that the pager attack in Lebanon, the terror attack that they unleashed in Lebanon, that this is not the only place where they have manipulated technological equipment. And then the journalist says, okay, so it's like, is it booby trapped? And he says, not just booby trapped. We are also spying. And he says, okay, which countries? And he says, every single country that you can think of. So Israel then becomes a burden. They're not giving us intel chips because they like human progress. They're just spying on us. Every phone in your hand can be a potential weapon. And that is like now they are struggling to articulate one thing, why the US needs Israel rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and let's end on that, and on the point that I think even Arab countries, I think there's a realization, you know, what would the Middle East be like with an Israeli hegemon? Okay, Iran is weak, maybe if we don't want Iranian hegemony, but do they really want Israeli hegemony? Israeli hegemony where there is still an ideological thirst for Greater Israel. You don't know what Greater Israel means. Greater Israel could mean parts of Syria, could mean parts of Saudi Arabia. So you don't really know. No one at the beginning of 1948, when Israel was created, thought that Israel would expand the way it has in this imperial way, because Zionism is an ideology, and the more you feed this ideology, the more thirst it has for expansion. And if you indulge that expansion, if you indulge that ideology, who knows where the borders could land? So I think countries like Saudi Arabia, Syria, who's looking to normalize ties maybe one day, they need to really think, you know, okay, what kind of Middle East do we want? And do we want an Israeli hegemon whose thirst for territory is constantly expanding? And can it be ever, you know, satiated? I don't think it can.
That's a good way to end it on this note. Like the Israelis are drunk now on invincibility and lack of consequence. You have the worst mixture in Israel that brings the ugliest of humans, which is a narrative of monopoly on victimhood, combined with a narrative of superiority, that they are superhumans, combined with absolute impunity. So you are seeing that you are the victim, and at the same time, you're better than everybody else. You're chosen. And at the same time, there are no consequences. And you are morally, legally, politically justified to do whatever you want. So you can count on the Israelis to go too far. And when they sort of this overreach, when they go too far, that's when things start blowing up in their face. That's what happened in the US and what's happening around Europe. It's the same with the McCarthyist era. With McCarthy, when he went after the left in the US, nobody cared. As soon as McCarthyism started to feel this sense of invincibility, that they can get away with anything, and went to purge the American army, that's when McCarthyism collapsed. And you can see the same thing happening in Israel. When they bombed Doha, that's when every country in the region, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, they got the message: you cannot count on the Israelis. You can never be on their good side. You can never be safe by being their partner. You are not safe at all. They can bomb you at any second without a second thought. And you're seeing now with even like countries like the Emirates, they're no longer in the area where they are trying to get their way to Washington through Tel Aviv. Now they are at the stage where they are trying to tell the Americans that we can be the new Israel of the Middle East, that we are better than Israel in the Middle East in terms of technological advancements, AI, being the cub on the beat, being in a central location. So you're seeing that competition instead of alliance.
Muhammad, let's end on that. It was a real pleasure talking with you. I think we got through quite a lot. We've spoken for longer than an hour, I think. Yes, definitely. Hopefully, I'm going to try and get you on our show again. I think your insights are amazing, fantastic, and everyone who watched this, do follow Muhammad. His updates on Gaza is second to none, and he really does follow Israeli media closely, and you'll get a perspective which not many people on social media are unable to provide. So thanks again, and thank you all for joining us, and see you next week for another Palestine review show. Bye-bye.